Hey everyone! Today we're back with 200 Days of Minecraft 1.21. In the last video, we transformed this hillside into a beautiful starter area, raided trial chambers, and even collected all of the new wolf variants in Minecraft. But this time I'm only giving myself two goals: beat the Ender Dragon to get an elytra, and build as much as possible. If you enjoy these kinds of videos, make sure you hit subscribe. And with all that said, I can't wait to show you how much we accomplished in this video, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. We start our adventure in this video on day 101. The very first thing I wanted to tackle today was going to the Nether, but on my way there I realized that I forgot a shield. So I crafted one up and then headed into the Nether with a whole list of things that I needed to do there. So many people commented on the last video reminding me to go into the Bastion, so that's where we headed first. I towered up and stole all of the gold from the piglins, and then I fought off some not so friendly piglin brutes while I was searching for some chests. I explored around the entire structure on day 101 and I only ended up finding 2 chests. Neither of which had a netherite upgrade template, but I did get some netherite scrap and some ancient debris. Overall, I was a bit disappointed with the loot in this bastion, so as it turned to day 102, I left the bastion in hopes of continuing my search to find a nether fortress. We were going to need a bunch of blaze rods to make our Eyes of Ender, so I tunneled through the walls hoping to find an open area, but instead I stumbled upon another bastion in another cave and decided to see if I could head in to find the netherite upgrade since I was already here. I fought off some more brutes and then explored around looking for some more chests, eventually finding this super large chest area which had some okay loot in the first chest, but the second chest was absolutely incredible. I grabbed both netherite upgrade templates and then headed out of there, and luckily right outside there was a nether fortress as well, which was amazing. I gathered up some nether ore and then I looted some chests where I got not only 1 but 2 rib armor trim templates. And then I spent the rest of the day into day 103 fighting off wither skeletons and killing blazes to get blaze rods. Once I'd killed enough blazes, it was time to head back to the overworld so I can continue the next phase of the project. And I was so happy to be home and away from all the gas noises in the Nether. I spent some time sorting and organizing everything I'd gathered from the Nether, and then I decided it was time to buy a mending book since we were going into the end for my elytra. I headed over to my villagers with just enough for 1 mending book because I already had an unbreaking book back home, and on the way home I saw this really cute bunny, but I left him there so that I could go home and combine my mending and unbreaking books in my anvil and then head back into the Nether on day 104 because I forgot to get some ender pearls, so I also grabbed some quartz and some glowstone, and then I headed to a crimson biome I'd seen when I was looking for the Nether fortress so that I could hopefully find a warped biome as well. I gathered both crimson and warped nylium when I found it, and then I spent some time just killing endermen. With my task accomplished and 14 ender pearls in my pocket, I went home and crafted up 12 Eyes of Ender, and then on the morning of day 105 started brewing up some slow falling potions. While I was waiting for those to be done, I crafted up an ender chest and of course made some rockets with the gunpowder and paper that I had. And then it was time. I was throwing my first eye and it was day 105 and I was ready to go fight this dragon. It was a pretty uneventful journey to the stronghold, and it took me in a very familiar direction as we'd already been this way in the last video when we were looking for some dark oak wood. And before I knew it became nightfall, and it's a good thing it did because in this battle with these skeletons I realized something. I didn't bring a bow with me. And to get a new bow I was going to have to return to my base 1,000 blocks in the other direction. But luckily it was a pretty chill trip that night and I finally made it back over to the XP farm as the sun started to rise on day 106. I swiped at the zombies until I had enough XP to hit level 30, and then I enchanted a brand new bow that I'd crafted with flame, power 3, and punch 1. I'd really been hoping for infinity, but instead of wasting any more time, I headed back in the same direction that I went yesterday with the intent of fighting the Ender Dragon today. It was once again a pretty chill journey, and by the time night was just about to fall, I found the spot where the eyes went under, and from there it was time to start digging down a staircase. Eventually I fell into a big deep slate cave, and while I was exploring I found an exposed part of the stronghold. And then comes my absolute favorite part of searching all over through the stronghold for the portal. And this generation was seriously messed up. It was so weird and broken all over the place. Eventually I stumbled upon a library room where I looted the chest for some armor trims and then spent some time grabbing the bookshelves out of the stronghold for use later. I was still pretty lost on day 107 searching for the portal when suddenly I faintly heard a silverfish and lava bubbling sound. I dug through the ground to find that the portal was actually below me and jumped down and took out the silverfish spawner in the center of the room. Unluckily for me, it was a zero-eye portal, so I had to use the blaze rods and the ender pearls that I brought to craft up some more eyes of ender to finish the portal. Only a few days into our challenge and it was time to go beat the dragon. When I jumped in, I noticed that the end was a little bit more pink than usual, and apparently this is a glitch that I learned later on after the fight that happens with the gamma mod sometimes. However, that was the last thing on my mind, as I needed to take out all of the crystals and then start hitting the dragon with my bow so that I could take her HP down and kill her. This was actually probably one of the easiest dragon fights I've ever had in my entire life. She was completely agreeable, and as soon as she died, the end kind of went back to normal, so that was a weird one. Anyways, I grabbed up all of the XP, and then of course I also grabbed the dragon egg. And then it was time to build up to the gateway so that I could go into the outer end and search for an elytra. Every time I go through these, I'm scared that I'm going to be right on the edge of a platform, and this time I was on the edge of the smallest platform I've ever seen. It was literally like 2 blocks wide. But luckily nearby there was a small end city. This one didn't have a ship, but it did have a loot room, so of course I went over and I killed the shulkers guarding the city. And then I propelled myself upwards using the levitation effect to get to the chest, killing any shulkers on the way that got in my way. I looted the chest for some decent loot and then crafted my first shulker box where I started to store everything that I was going to be gathering. But as that end city was looted, it was time to go in search of another one. And not too far away, we did end up finding another one, but this one also didn't have a ship and it was really small. But I still bridged over, as it would be good to grab some more shulkers for my big projects that I had planned for this video. I ran out of blocks and had to make a pit stop to grab some more endstone so that I could keep bridging towards the next city. But besides a few shulkers, there was absolutely no loot in this city, not even a single chest, so I just killed the shulkers and then left. I was not going to leave the end without an elytra, so I spent all of day 108 and most of day 109 in the end looking for another city. I bridged over the dangerous nothingness and visited a bunch of end cities, collecting shulker shells and treasures along the way. And while there was nothing super amazing, there was a lot of iron, which would be helpful back at the base for projects. Finally, after searching for a super long time, I saw in the distance one city that had a ship. I headed over and made my way up the towers, killing shulkers and looting chests when I could, even getting some feather falling foreboots. Eventually I found myself on the ship. I killed the shulker and then looted the chest in front of the elytra. I grabbed the elytra and then brought out my ender chest, which had my anvil and mending unbreaking book on it, so I named my elytra and then went for my first flight, but we didn't actually end up going too far as there was another city really close with another ship. I decided to quickly loot the nearby end cities before going home, since it was just basically a bunch of free loot that we could get here. And once I was done, I headed through the gateway nearby and I went back through the portal to world spawn as I saw a bunch of XP go into the portal and grabbed that immediately. I spent the rest of night 109 hunting creepers in the overworld for a supply of gunpowder to fuel our rockets. On day 110, I spent some time in that morning sorting the loot from the end and then took to the skies to head over to the enchanting area. I enchanted my mace now that I had some extra levels and added the windburst book that we got the last time before combining some boots I found at the end with my own to add feather falling. With the mace enchanted, I wanted to see how it would work against a cow and completely missed, but then I got it to work against a chicken. Then I absolutely destroyed this sheep and I felt so bad, but that was pretty cool. At home, I combined my Silk Touch pickaxe with an efficiency 4 pickaxe to get efficiency 5, and then I crafted up some shulker boxes and went down into the caves to collect some andesite and some stone for the projects that I was going to be working on in this video. And of course, I spent the night hunting creepers for more gunpowder for our rockets. The next morning, I made a shulker for my backup tools, and then I harvested some sugarcane so that I could craft up some extra rockets. Immediately after that, I jumped into some terraforming to start shaping the next platform for the next retaining wall that would go here. But eventually I realized that it was going to go a lot faster if I had a beacon. So I popped up into the house to brew some fire res potions and then headed into the nether to find a fortress. I spent most of the day here looking for some wither skeleton spawns, but there weren't that many to be honest, and I didn't get any skulls. So I flew off into the skies looking for another fortress, hopefully in a Soul Sand Valley, but then I found this one in a warped forest, and this one actually had quite a few wither skeletons in it. And by the time that day 112 rolled around, I finally had all 3 skulls and I was ready to go fight the wither. On the way out of the nether, I saw another piglin bastion where I basically just bowed down the brutes from afar. And I was really hoping for some netherite or maybe pigstep, but the loot was pretty trash. So I just went home through my portal, and by the way, this is why I always swapped my chestplate, because I got attacked by a magma cube here. With the rest of the day, I headed down into the caves to fight the wither as I didn't want to risk destroying any of my base, and on the way down I collected any iron that I found in the caves. I dug a staircase down to the bedrock level and then made a very long tunnel so that I could summon the wither and have a safety tunnel to fight in. I set up the summoning sand and put on these skulls, and then the fight was over in less than 30 seconds. I didn't even get hit. I collected the Nether Star and then headed into the Wither Tunnel to pick up any exposed ores that had been exposed in the fight. And then since I was already down at the bottom of the world, I decided to spend the rest of day 112 into day 113, basically just collecting all the resources that I could find for my beacon. I would need just over 2.5 stacks of iron blocks to make a fully powered beacon, so this was just a super important task that I had to unfortunately grind out. I finally made it back out of the caves on day 114, and then I spent the entire day, literally the entire day, creating a giant flex pile of all the ores I'd mined up. The flex pile felt like it was taller than some of the mountains around my base, and I spent a lot of time fortuning them down into their usable components, and here's the entire haul. It definitely didn't look like we had enough, especially of the iron, but at this point, I was just worried about getting an auto blast smelter going so I could start smelting my ores. On the morning of day 115, I flew over to that lava pool that we used to grab obsidian to go to the nether last time and mined up some more obsidian to make our beacon. I spotted some iron on the mountainside that I fortuned up really quick, and then when I was on my way home, I heard a screaming goat. But I left him there in favor of going home and crafting my beacon, and then pretty much spent the rest of the day just crafting whatever iron had smelted into blocks. While I was waiting, I sorted out my shulker mess as well, and I found a bunch of gold that we'd looted from the piglin bastion, so we basically just needed to get to 2 stacks of iron. And I also got bored and decided to swap out the old torch lighting for some lanterns, which I think looked a lot better in the workshop. Day 116, I was back out grinding out more iron ore to finish the beacon. I really wanted to work on this project with a beacon, and I was not going to stop until I had enough iron. I probably should have just made an iron farm for all of the time that I spent mining iron, but sometimes the old-fashioned way is just a little bit more satisfying. Later that night, back at the base, I made another flex pile and fortuned everything up once again. And this time I really hoped that all the iron that I'd gathered would be enough to make the rest of our beacon and maybe a little bit extra for future projects. The next morning I did a bunch of chores around the base, like laying out some more copper trapdoors to age down and harvesting some sugarcane. We were getting super close to having all the blocks that we need for the full beacon, so I decided to start laying out what we had while we were waiting for the rest of the iron to smelt. Getting this all set up only 117 days into a world made me feel so proud of myself, and it filled me with such a huge sense of accomplishment. But the time for celebration was over, as it was time to once again get to work terraforming the area. I removed multiple layers of dirt and started laying out the foundation for a new platform. On day 118, I started laying out the polished andesite that marked the top of the wall, and then I continued the terraforming project below where the new wall would go. While removing the layers and layers of grass and stone, a wandering trader spawned and had mangrove propagules. So I grabbed my emeralds and then I bought 2 propagules and then I planted them over by my other trees. Then it was once again back to the grind, and by the middle of the night, it was finally to a point where I was relatively happy with it. But instead of going to sleep, I spent the rest of the night gathering some andesite in a nearby cave so I could top up on my supply that I would use for the wall. On days 119 and 120, I cleaned up the terraforming on the layer under our base, and then I filled the wall back in with stone brick, and andesite to finish it down to the correct platform height. And then I basically did the same thing again on the bottom wall going towards the ocean side. And on day 121, I took a step back to assess my progress, and I was truly happy with how it was coming together so far. I then spent some time running the aged trapdoors along the wall as the railing, and then I fortuned up some copper I'd collected and smelted it down for more trapdoors. I noticed that my mangrove propagules had grown up, so I decided to start chopping down some mangrove wood for a build, and this was the smallest mangrove tree ever. And then I moved on to chopping up some dark oak before heading over to a nearby river biome to collect a ton of clay to smelt down for bricks. By the end of the night, I had a bunch of stacks of clay balls and decided to head back home to start getting those smelted up as well. On day 122, I moved my auto smelting setup out of the kitchen to where the furnaces normally were, and then I added all of my clay balls to get smelted down into bricks. Following that, the resource grind continued, and I spent the rest of the day chopping up dark oak, mangrove, and spruce wood. The morning of day 123, I headed over to the village nearby where my Fletchers were to try to find another villager that I could trade with. I ended up coaxing this villager that was stuck on a roof into a house with a lectern and then started rolling him for silk touch. I really wanted this on my shovel and also for my hoe so that I could more easily get things like leaves and grass and podzol. And this started taking absolutely forever, so I took a break to trade some emeralds with my Fletcher for some sticks. And the rolling process lasted well into day 124, where after rolling the villager for what felt like 30 minutes straight, I finally found the silk touch trade and locked it in. I bought 3 books because I only had 3 books on me, and then I went to the XP farm to add Silk Touch to my shovel and Silk Touch and Unbreaking 3 to my hoe. After that, I headed back over to the base and I removed the copper pipe for now because I wanted to start building out some buildings over here and I didn't know if this would end up staying here forever or not. And then I crafted up some more copper trapdoors to lay out to age for, once again, adding to the railing eventually. And then for the rest of the night, I just hung out AFK by the furnaces so that the clay balls would all smelt. The morning of day 125, I started out by laying out all the nether quartz that I had to fortune into its raw form. Also, just a tip from me, if you have mending on your items and you're mining up something that gives XP, hold that tool in your offhand and let it mend. I crafted up the raw quartz into blocks and then dropped some into the furnace to smelt to get smooth quartz. And then I headed into the nether to get some more quartz ore, and of course I ended up setting myself on fire accidentally and I just burned for so long. I hate it here. When I was no longer burning to death, I collected up some more quartz ore and even a bunch of gravel to make coarse dirt later on. Back in the overworld, I spent the night hunting creepers for more gunpowder and even got lucky enough to have a skeleton help me gain another music disc. The next morning on day 126, I bone mealed some moss nearby the wall where I still needed to terraform, and then I collected a bunch of moss with my hoe. Some of the trapdoors I'd laid out to age had finished, so I gathered them and then added them to the railing on the wall, and then I set my sights on finally starting my first build on the second platform. I laid out a brick and granite foundation to finish off day 126, and then on day 127 finished up the small row house nestled against the dirt wall. The next day I wanted to do some detailing on the house, so I added a door and then added some glass panes for windows. Then it came time to do the roof, and I added a moss roof, and I wanted to try to make it flat with a smooth quartz slab trim around the edge. Then I bone mealed an azalea, and I spent some time gathering the leaves so that I could detail the roof with lilacs, alliums, and of course the flowering azalea. And at the end of the day, I was pretty happy with how it was looking. The next morning on day 129, I gathered up some more aged trapdoors and added them to the railing once again before starting the second building on the new platform. This small house was made out of oak, spruce, dark oak, and a little bit of mangrove and netherrack as well. The next day was a rainy one and I spent some time fixing up the walls on the inside of the house to make it look a little bit better, and then I put together a little wagon cart kind of thing outside where I was going to store a bunch of honey and barrels and stuff. I had a bunch of leaves in my inventory, so of course I added some scattered about. And then I did a little bit of extra shaping to the roof, adding some stairs, slabs, and trap doors to make it look a little bit more interesting. Back over in the first building, I realized I hadn't put a floor in, so I tore out the old floor and then put in a rich dark oak floor. And then I spent the rest of day 130 down in the caves collecting up a bunch of cobblestone, as somehow I did not have any of it. On day 131, I wanted to take a break from building, so I flew off in a random direction and hoped to find a sunflower plains biome. On the way, I found my first cherry grove biome where I stopped to pick up some pink petals in case I'd want them, and some cherry saplings as well. And to expand our honeycomb farm back at home, I took the bee's nest as well. I flew around for quite a while looking for some sunflowers, and finally, after what felt like hours, even though it was only about 10 minutes, I found the tiniest patch of sunflowers where I could harvest some and take them home. Across the river from the plains biome, there was a flower forest, so I spent some time there picking a bunch of different kinds of flowers. And on the way back to the base, I got a little bit distracted because I found a buried treasure map. Eventually, I found the chest, and then it had some pretty decent loot, a ton of iron and some emeralds, which was always nice. I got even more distracted on the way home because I found a swamp biome and I wanted to grab some blue orchids and some lily pads, and of course I had to fight for my life because it was the middle of the night in a swamp. But honestly, I was not a girly that would say no to some free gunpowder. And it was actually here that I remembered that Minecraft added a new kind of skeleton called the Bogged, which was really cool, but the poison lasts so long, it was actually kind of annoying. Anyways, got out of there so that I could find a village to sleep in so that the night would pass, and eventually found this village, which I've actually been to before. In the morning, I crafted up some more rockets, and since I was nearby the mega tag, I decided to fly over there and spent the rest of the day pretty much just gathering up a bunch of podzol, coarse dirt, and mossy cobblestone. When I made it back to my base, it was already the middle of the night, so I headed to sleep. Now that we had sunflowers on day 133, I could start building up a farm inside of the first brick and granite building. Inside all of these buildings that we were going to be putting on the second platform, I wanted to put a bunch of micro farms, and then this one we were going to be having a 2-tall flower farm. It took me a while to figure out exactly how I wanted it to look, but once I had all of the pieces together, I tested out to make sure that all of the redstone would work. And eventually it was all finished and looking pretty tidy, and I was really happy with it. The next day I was crafting up even more redstone components as I wanted to add a farm to the mangrove building as well, and this one was going to be for honeycomb. I started mining out the area underneath behind the wall, and luckily there was a ton of space underneath my starter house where I would basically just be able to do whatever I needed to do for the farm. Once all the redstone was working, I placed in the flowers and then of course placed in all of my beehives, including the one that I had stolen. And then just like in the first house, I spent some time prettying up the area around the farm so that it wouldn't look like such a mess every single time that I came in here. And this wasn't perfect, but it was okay for now. Day 135 was a chores day around the base where I basically sorted all of the junk in my shulkers and made sure it was all put away, and then I headed outside down to the cows so I could breed them up and then do a little bit of slaughtering to get some more food. After I put my food to smoke in the kitchen, I came out to collect some more spruce wood, and then I headed over to a nearby forest to collect a ton of oak wood as well. On day 136, I went back to the same forest because I realized that I was going to also need some birch wood for the next build, and I forgot to get some while I was here yesterday. And then I headed down to collect some more cobblestone because I was running out again. With all the resource gathering out of the way, I spent the next few days building up this adorable little birch and oak cottage before moving into a medieval-style cottage with a copper roof next door. I spent most of day 140 adding small details to the build before moving inside to tackle a bit of an interior as I wanted this cottage to store my enchanted books. I made sure to place down a ton of bookshelves and chiseled bookshelves before adding my enchanted books to them, and when that was done, I went outside and gathered up all of the copper that had aged. Day 141 was a rainy day where I decided that I was going to dye a couple of my sheep cyan so I could start collecting some cyan wool for a future project. After that, I headed out in search of a mangrove swamp as I wanted to use a bunch of packed mud and mud bricks in a build. I had no idea where a mangrove swamp was since we hadn't found one in our adventures last time, but on the way I did find a dark oak forest where I touched down and grabbed some brown mushroom to texture with. I did end up finding a huge swamp which luckily opened up into a mangrove swamp, so I spent the rest of the day there collecting up a ton of mud. I know you can make this with water bottles and turn dirt into mud that way, but I didn't feel like making 6 stacks worth of it, so instead, here we are. On the way home, I saw a ruined nether portal, and this portal had 2 full blocks of gold in the chest. And somehow I found a different Badlands biome that I had never been to before, so I stopped down to grab a bunch of terracotta while I was here. I went to hit stop recording on day 142 and realized I never hit start. While I was flying home, I found a woodland mansion, killed an evoker, and got a totem. I feel really silly right now. Day 143, I placed down a bunch of extra nether quartz so that I could fortune it up once again to craft down into blocks and then smelt. I crafted up some pistons and observers so that I could work on a new farm to go inside of the birch building. And of course, this would end up being a sugarcane farm. Just like with the other farms, I made sure to set it up and then worried about aesthetics later after making sure that it was actually functional. And at the end, it was kind of cute actually. On day 144, I started setting out outlines for the next couple of builds that I wanted to do on the second platform. After I got both of the outlines done and I was happy with them, I started working on the stone outline, which is going to be like a little raised platform, sort of like a shared outdoor space. I wanted to have a little bit of outdoor storage up here, maybe a few flowers, and also some flowers from our flower farm out front planted along the front edge of the wall. I thought about doing a couple of plant shelves, but I decided that I would actually put in some grass for a little like plant bed, and then we could put in some more too tall flowers like these lilacs. The next few days I spent experimenting with a little bit of a two-tone build, so on one side I did a mossy kind of terracotta build and the other side was mud and dirt. And here's just a quick overview of how it's all looking together on the morning of day 147. Before I left for the day, I stopped in and checked on my bees, which had been producing quite a bit of honeycomb. After that, I flew off to a nearby cave to collect some more resources, mainly more iron. I had an idea to move my librarian villagers from the snowy area into the bookshop, so I was going to need a lot of rails, meaning a lot of iron. Back at the base that night, I swapped out our furnaces once again for blast furnaces and fortuned up all the iron and other resources that we collected. Day 148, I spent building a really ugly cactus farm, and don't worry, we literally never come back here to look at it ever again. On day 149, the iron was mostly done smelting, so I spent some time crafting up some rails to use to move our villagers, and then I spent the next 3 days until day 151 digging a super long tunnel. I alternated the digging task with also laying out some rail for the villagers to go on, and I made sure to lay down some powered rail as well to keep them moving at a decent speed. About halfway through, I ran out of rails, so I had to push the villagers down and then pick up all the railway and replace it all the way down into the bookshop. But truly, this was one of the least frustrating times I've ever had working with villagers, so that's a plus. Towards the end of day 151, I laid out all of the ores that I'd gathered while mining out the tunnel and fortuned them all up before laying in the copper to smelt. And when that was finished smelting on day 152, I laid out the copper blocks that I'd crafted to age down into some oxidized copper. I cleared out the old cactus farm and then headed out in search of a very deep cave as I wanted to go down to the deep slate level to easily get a bunch of tuff. I could see deep slate in this cave already, so I headed in and then it opened up into an ancient city. I saw a huge tuff vein, so I headed over to start mining. I spent a while there into day 153 gathering almost an entire shulker of tuff. And on my way out of the ancient city, I couldn't help but look in a couple of the chests, but none of the loot was that great. On day 154, I was thinking that the whole area looked a little bit messy, so I was up bright and early to start tearing down the old tree farm and then putting all that tuff to use by making a wall down on the ocean side. It had really been bothering me how chaotic and messy the entire part of the base was looking, and with a bit more structure, I could finally start terraforming and preparing it for a new build. On day 157, I started collecting some of the copper we laid down earlier as it had already aged, and then I flew off to the XP farm since my shovel and pickaxe were getting a bit low for my tastes. And from here, you guys know the drill. I swiped at zombies to get XP, and also their rotten flesh so that later on that night I could trade it with my cleric for some more emeralds. And before I went to sleep, my copper had been done smelting, so I crafted some copper blocks, and then on day 158, I laid them down on the newly terraformed area so that they could start to age down into their oxidized form. The raised park area was looking a little bit weird, so I added a overhang over on the side that matched the overhang on the front, and I really felt like this helped the whole area come together a little bit more. I added chests, barrels, crafting tables, and even some bees nests that we made out of our honeycomb, and then I collected up a bunch of copper that had aged down once again. I spent the next 2 days into day 160 collecting even more resources for the next build we'd be tackling. It seemed like I was constantly running out of spruce, plain oak wood, and andesite, so I spent a lot of time those days gathering a bunch before planting down some bamboo to grow for crafting scaffolding. On day 161, I started my morning with making the rounds for aged copper once again before bringing down a bunch of materials we had in our storage room to test a partial pathway down at the oceanside wall. The combo of podzol, coarse dirt, and spruce planks is one of my favorites, but instead of working on the pathway further, I decided to work on texturing the wall. I could have used other tough blocks, but I decided to go with mossy cobblestone here, and I'm really glad that I did because it provided a really good contrast. That evening, I focused on collecting up some more of the aged copper that I would be needing for the future build, and on the morning of day 162, I flew off in the direction of the mega taiga we've found in the last video and collected up a bunch more mossy cobblestone. I didn't know exactly how much I was going to need to texture the whole wall, so I spent a while here gathering a bunch of different stacks of it, and on the way back to the base I noticed that our bamboo had grown in, so I swooped down to collect up a bunch of it. I haven't shown it in a while, but I did shear my sheep once again, and I've been doing this pretty consistently to get a bunch of wool. And then the next morning I was crafting up a bunch of components that we were going to need for our next build and our next farm, including a bunch of scaffolding. For the farm, I was going to have to breed our cats, but for some reason, whenever I stand them up, they all get obsessed with this one window pane. I don't understand why, but eventually I had 2 babies on a lead, and I set them down here on the second platform so I could start up the farm. And if you haven't guessed it already, yeah, we were building a creeper farm. I was getting a little bit tired of pretty much staying up whenever I needed gunpowder, so I wanted a way to AFK for some. And if you guys want to build this farm in your world, I'll leave a link to the tutorial I used in the description. Day 165 was a very busy day as I was going to tackle a build I've never tried to make before, a pretty AFK spot. It's a little bit cliche, but I did make a hot air balloon that kind of matched the solar punk vibe of our world, and it looks a lot better than an ugly cobble box. But as you can see from this time lapse, only like 3 creepers spawned, so I figured on day 167 and 168 I'd head down into the caves with some torches to light up an area around the farm. I tried to find as much of the unlit area as I possibly could and light it up as best I can, even finding some of the rare deep slate coal ore down underground. I mined up the entire vein that I could find, and then I headed back up to the surface for another short AFK session into day 169, where it did appear that the rates had improved. That morning I started working on the rest of the build that was going to be over the creeper farm. I wanted this farm to sort of tie in with the starter house, so I used a similar palette with oak, but eventually I ran out and I had to collect some more oak to finish up the walls on day 170. With all that extra oak that I mined up, I got the walls all filled in, and then the next morning I bone mealed up some azalea bushes to be azalea trees so that I could collect a bunch of the azalea leaves and flowering azalea leaves. I really liked how we'd used these before on the medieval style house to make flower boxes, so I wanted to replicate that here as well, and so I made a bunch of flower boxes on the outside of the house. Once those were all done, I flew over to a nearby beach where I gathered some sand to smelt down into glass, which I then dyed white and used as window panes for the build. On day 172, I realized that I would not have enough copper for the roof with what I currently had on hand, so instead of going mining, I decided to head down to the trial chamber we'd looted in the last video. I once again had a bit of guilt over taking resources from such a beautiful structure, but time was starting to run out and I had so many things I still wanted to finish up in this world before we ended the 200-day challenge. I of course had to fight off some skeletons who were protecting the chamber's pre-waxed copper, but they were no match for me, and before I knew it, I was back home de-waxing and scraping the copper to get into the various stages I need for the build. I then cut it down and then re-waxed it with the honeycomb that we got from our farm. I spent the next 5 days in a building whirlwind where I finished up the roof and I did all the detailing on the house. Once again, to match the starter house, I did a copper gradient and added a nice tough chimney here. And on the other side, we replicated the same kind of gradient and then added a big dormer window in the middle. I finished up the framing and the walls of the house before moving on to adding a overhang over the doorway. And honestly, I think this is probably my favorite part of the entire house. I just love how lush and beautiful this looks. Out in front of the house, I spent some time laying down a flower garden, filled the flower bed with coarse dirt and rooted dirt, and then I added some roses, azalea, flowering azalea, and tulips to complete it. At this point, I was completely satisfied with how the creeper farm was looking, so I decided to shift my focus on curving a staircase upwards towards the creeper farm level, and I spent most of days 179 and 180 extending the muddy looking pathway all the way over to the opposite end of the wall past the beacon. The rest of day 180, I focused on detailing the tough wall, replacing a bunch of bits with mossy cobblestone to texture it. I added some slabs, walls, and stairs to give it a broken down look on the top, as if perhaps the water from the ocean waves had damaged it over time. I also headed down into the caves with some bone meal to bone meal up a bunch of glow lichen, which I then used in spots alongside the wall to give it a bit of light to keep it a little bit more safe down there. It also has a lightness to it that I feel like really kind of makes it look like salt has damaged the wall, and on the morning of day 181, I was really happy with how it was looking. For the rest of the day, I turned my attention to the second level where there was no pathways and no real connection between any of the buildings. I added pathways between all of the buildings to show where people would move around up here, and then focused my attention on re-adding the pipe that we'd removed so long ago. I don't know why I'm so obsessed with re-adding this pipe, but I'm so happy that I did because it helps add a little bit of a water feature onto this level and have some movement naturally. I saw an opportunity here to create a little water feature on this platform with a small bridge, so I spent all day on day 182 shaping a small creek bed to help the water flow further down. On day 183, I added some details that I felt were missing on the buildings, including window treatments and copper pipes on this brick one. On the mud building, I added a bunch of flowers, nether foliage, and leaves because I'd forgotten to when I first built it. And then I made this like banner hanging thing attached to one of the buildings where I was finally able to use all that cyan wool we'd been collecting to hang some banners. And to end out the day, I added some more flowers over by the waterbed area that we'd built. Then came the time to work on the area over by the cows, and I had been debating the entire time of making this video what I wanted to do with this area. I ended up settling on making another retaining wall and making another level to the platforms, which I originally didn't want to do. But honestly, now that I'm editing this, I'm actually really glad that I did this since I was able to blend the existing wall upwards, which seems to make the most sense to me anyways given the steep heights of cliffside living. On day 189, I spent the morning focusing on getting rid of all the stone and gravel and replacing it with grass to clean up the wall around the creeper farm. Then I went around collecting a bunch of copper trapdoors that had aged around the farm. And upstairs in my base, I crafted a bunch more to lay out to continue aging because I was going to need a lot of them for this new section of the wall. Any of the ones that were ready that I collected earlier, I laid out as the railing once again on the top of the new wall. And then I spent the entire night AFK hoping that more would age down. In the morning, I made some more rounds, collecting up any of the ones that had aged down. And then I added more to the railing just like I did with the previous walls, which this part was so satisfying, by the way. I hit all of those in a row. I didn't even miss one until this point where I did miss that one, but we don't talk about that. And it was at this moment that I realized it was day 190 and I was running out of time to complete this challenge. In a panic, I spent the next several days trying to finish up whatever detailing was still needed around the base. I wouldn't really have time to build any extra structures on the base, but I wanted to make sure that everything that we did build was looking a bit more complete. Focusing a lot on the second level, I added a bunch of greenery, plants, seating areas, and custom trees. Honestly, we'd be here for an hour if I described every single thing that I did, so I planted a bunch of flowers, added street lamps, added even more bone meal to make the area look more full. I carved a pathway all the way around the creeper farm, and I wish that I could have made it match the blocks from below, but I just didn't have time to swap out all of the ground. In all the empty space around the creeper farm, I added a bunch of bone meal just for some flowers and some plants, just so it would look a little bit more alive down here. When I was pretty much done, I went ahead and removed the beacon so that I could fix the wall behind it, as I hadn't touched the terraforming and texturing on it at all. I spent an entire day removing all of the old trees from the old tree farm. And when all of that was done, I went ahead and organized and sorted all of my shulkers and put everything away from the mess that I'd made over the last 100 days. Day 199, and I have a very special name to give my horse today. Naylor Swift! And I'm not gonna lie, I completely forgot about building the armadillos their own pen, so they still hate me. On the last day of my 100-day challenges, I love to walk around and see what I've done, and also say goodbye to all my animals and everything, and yeah. I wish I would have done a little bit more with that area up here, but I just kind of ran out of time, and I didn't really know what to do in the time that I had. I really wanted to put like a windmill and a barn up here, but I guess maybe if we do 300 days. Overall, I'm super happy that I decided not to give myself a lot of in-game goals besides building, because I had such a blast building up this base. It is so colorful and fun, and I feel like I learned so much. Except for the cactus farm, which, let's see, did it produce? Actually it did, so not a total loss. Like I was saying, there's just so many fun details and colors everywhere that you look here. There's some kind of different tone or pattern that you should see. And I love that all these houses had a purpose with all these different mini farms inside of them. Especially the bee farm. Oh my gosh, this bee farm was incredible. I used so much of this honeycomb. Trying this new style out and kind of trying to expand my comfort zone and my horizons a little bit has been really, really fun for me. I had so many plans to put a dock and maybe like a warehouse or something down here and like a fishing area, but I just ran out of time. So instead we just have this. And I just love how the creeper farm came out. I didn't really do much of an interior in here because I wasn't sure what I wanted to turn this into, if it was going to be like storage or something, but I ran out of time anyways, so it doesn't really matter. I've never lived on a hillside before, so this was actually such a fun challenge, and I really love how the base fully came out. As is tradition, we'll say goodbye to all of our animals. Really wanted to build like a dog park or something to get all these barks out of my house, but they're so cute, you know, it doesn't really matter that much, right? Well, I guess I should head to sleep. My last night in this world for now. And here we are, we made it to day 200. I'm so happy. This was definitely my most building focused 100 days that I've ever done, and I hope you enjoyed. And if you did enjoy, make sure you like the video and leave a comment, and maybe consider subscribing too. Well, I guess this is where our adventure ends for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye!